Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge, Ms. Abudu, congratulations. I want to just talk to you, at least initially, a little bit about the law. Ms. Abudu, what's the adequate and independent state grounds doctrine?
Thank you, Senator Kennedy.
You're welcome.
In my practice, I actually haven't had an opportunity to use that principle or doctrine, but my general understanding is that it speaks to the fact that if a federal court is able to resolve an issue based on state law grounds, then that is what should lead in terms of the court's ultimate decision.
Okay. What is the selective incorporation doctrine?
That also, in the voting rights or civil rights context, is a term that I haven't had to come across. But what I do know is that as a legal research and writer, and for sure confronting possibly new areas of law, I look very forward to doing my due diligence in terms of making sure I'm familiar with doctrines such as that one.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to America First, the channel where we stand up for common sense, the Constitution, and the values that make this country great. If you love freedom, if you love America, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a dose of truth in your feed. Help us keep the America First message strong. Today, we're breaking down a Senate Judiciary hearing that really says it all about the current state of our judicial nominations. Senator John Kennedy grilled Judge Nancy Abudu, Biden's nominee for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, on some of the basics: the law, the Constitution, and yes, the issue of voter ID. Folks, what happened in this hearing should concern every American who cares about fair elections and the rule of law.
Do you know what it is?
So no, I'm not familiar with it sitting here
Selective
today.
incorporation doctrine? Okay. Well, you're going to see a lot of it if you're confirmed on the 11th Circuit. Can Congress pass any law that the Constitution doesn't prohibit?
Based on the frame of your question, I would say yes, that sounds right.
So you think Congress has plenary power?
Well, I would first look to what the Supreme Court has said in terms of following precedent.
No, but I'm interested, if I could, Counselor, in your opinion, does the United States Congress have delegated powers or plenary power?
Well, the Congress has both, I would say, from my general understanding. Again, it depends on the context and the issue, but it is.
Can you explain the difference to me between strict scrutiny and intermediate scrutiny?
Senator, strict scrutiny is the highest level of scrutiny that's often applied in constitutional cases.
What's the definition? I'm sorry, go ahead. Excuse me.
So it requires that a state, when enacting a law or regulation, have a compelling governmental interest for doing so, and that the law is narrowly tailored to achieve that interest.
Okay.
And then intermediate, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so intermediate speaks to the issue of having a substantial interest or that is, or an important governmental interest that is substantially related.
Okay. Do you believe that the meaning of the Constitution is immutable, or does it change over time?
Senator, I would say that the Supreme Court in some cases has analyzed that issue, and the response really does depend on the context and the issue. But what the court does or has done in its approach, of course, is look to the plain meaning of a statute or of the Constitution, because that really is where the inquiry should start. And if the language is plain, then that is where the inquiry can end.
Okay, thank you for that. You were involved in a 2021 report from the Southern Poverty Law Center about voting in Louisiana. Did you say, quote, racist white Southerners, close quote, and, quote, hostile white voters and governmental officials in Louisiana continue to make local polling places and early voting locations threatening spaces for black voters. Did you say that?
Senator, I do not believe that I said that. I haven't read that publication in
Will
some
you help
time.
write it?
I helped to draft the publication and approved it, but I'm not familiar with that
Oh,
language.
you don't, okay. In that same report, did you say, well, tell me where in Louisiana local polling places and early voting locations are threatening African-American voters? You said it, so which polling places?
So again, Senator, obviously I don't have that report in front of me to be able to read and remind myself of the examples that might have been shared. But what I can say is that Louisiana.
Let me cut you off because I'm going to run out of time, Counselor. Let me ask you one more. In August 2021, we're not talking 20 years ago, we're talking 2021, you were involved in another report by the SPLC, and you said that voter identification, photo ID to vote, is burdensome and does not serve any legitimate state interest. Do you really believe that?
Senator, identification for voting is
Yes,
something.
but first, do you really believe that? You said it. You meant it?
The Supreme Court in Crawford v. Marion County has already upheld voter ID laws as per se
Yeah, but you said it
constitutional.
didn't serve any legitimate state interest. Do you believe that?
Again, Senator, without that language in front of me, it's hard to understand
You
the
said it.
context.
Here it is, August 2021.
Well, there are
I'm
cases.
just asking you to explain to me why having to prove you are who you say you are before you vote doesn't serve, you said it doesn't serve any legitimate state interest. I'm just asking to explain that statement to me.
I understand, Senator Kennedy, and again, without being able to see the language that appears before and after, it's hard for the context.
You deny that you said it?
I can't say that I haven't seen that language in front of me, but what I do know is that there have been voter ID cases in which courts have found
Yeah, but
that
I know, I'm familiar with the case law, but I'm asking what you think, because you may be on the 11th Circuit. Do you believe that voter ID is inappropriate?
my commitment is to uphold the Supreme Court's decision in Crawford v. Marion
I know, but
County.
here you said it was inappropriate. You deny that?
Well, again,
Saying it?
Senator, it would be helpful to know if that section of the report also cites to cases in which federal courts have found that certain voter ID laws do pose an burden on voters.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy.
Let's start with the basics. Senator Kennedy opened by congratulating Judge Abudu. That's just Southern manners. But then he got straight to the point, asking her about legal doctrines that anybody who wants a seat on a federal appeals court ought to know. Things like the adequate and independent state grounds doctrine and selective incorporation. What did Judge Abudu say? She admitted she didn't know them. She hadn't used them in her practice. Folks, these aren't exotic, obscure ideas. These are the bread and butter of constitutional law. Now think about that. If you want to sit on the second highest court in the land, you ought to know the basics. Yet here we are with a nominee who is either unprepared or unwilling to answer basic legal questions. Would you trust a pilot who didn't know how to read an altimeter? Would you trust a doctor who didn't know how to take your pulse? Of course not. But apparently, Biden's judicial picks don't need to know the basics. Senator Kennedy pressed on, asking about the difference between delegated and plenary powers in Congress. Again, Judge Abudu danced around the question, giving vague, non-committal answers. It's almost like she was afraid to say anything too clear, because she knows her views are out of step with mainstream America. She did manage to explain the difference between strict scrutiny and intermediate scrutiny, but let's be real, folks, that's 1L law school stuff. Not exactly impressive when you're up for a seat on the 11th Circuit. Then Kennedy asked her if the meaning of the Constitution changes over time. Instead of giving a straight answer, like any originalist or constitutionalist would, she gave another wishy-washy response about context and precedent. That's liberal code for I'll interpret the Constitution however I want, depending on how I feel or what's politically convenient. But here's where it gets even worse. Senator Kennedy brought up a report Judge Abudu helped draft for the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the most radical left-wing organizations out there. The report allegedly accused racist white Southerners and hostile white voters of making polling places threatening for black voters in Louisiana. Kennedy asked her point-blank, "Did you say this? Which polling places are you referring to?" Judge Abudu claimed she couldn't remember. Folks, if you helped write a report and approved it, you ought to remember what it said, especially if it accuses an entire group of people of racism. And then comes the heart of the matter, voter ID. Kennedy cited another SPLC report where Judge Abudu said that requiring photo ID to vote is burdensome and does not serve any legitimate state interest. Let me repeat that. She claimed that making sure you are who you say you are when you vote, something you need to do to buy a beer, board a plane, or get into a government building, is somehow burdensome and not legitimate. Judge Abudu refused to stand by her words or deny them. She just kept citing Supreme Court precedent as if that excuses her personal beliefs. Folks, the Supreme Court has upheld voter ID laws because they're common sense. But we have a nominee for the federal bench who apparently thinks following basic rules to protect our elections is a burden. Here's the bottom line, America. Our elections matter. The right to vote is sacred, and so is the responsibility to protect that right for every legitimate voter. Voter ID isn't about excluding anyone. It's about making sure every vote counts and that our elections are fair and honest. If you need ID to check out a library book or buy cold medicine, you should need it to vote. But the radical left, the Biden administration, and groups like the SPLC want to tear down any safeguard that keeps our elections secure. They want activist judges on the bench who will twist the law to fit their agenda, judges who can't even answer basic questions about the Constitution, but are ready to call half the country racist for wanting common sense rules. That's why we need to stay informed and keep fighting. We need judges who respect the Constitution as it's written, not as the woke left wishes it was. We need leaders who will ask the tough questions like Senator Kennedy did and won't be bullied into silence. If you agree, if you want to keep America strong, fair, and free, do your part. Like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Let's keep the America First message loud and clear because our future depends on it. Thanks for watching, Patriots. Until next time, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. Don't forget, subscribe for more real talk and common sense commentary. Coming up next, we'll break down the latest push for mail-in voting and what it means for 2024. Stay tuned and stay strong.